So this kind of looks at the same thing as what I put in that 15-minute video, looking at how you can use different fuels in cellular respiration, and then also how the molecules of cellular respiration can also be used to build up other molecules. And so we talked about when we look at this, the idea that we can take amino acids and they can be converted into 2 carbon backbones that are called keto acids that can be used in Krebs cycle, but notice here too, they get used here as well. And then we also talked about the idea of fats being used to create, to actually in the process of the lipolysis, to create glycerol and fatty acids, and then those fatty acids can also be turned into acetyl-CoAs through beta oxidation. And so check out that video, because that video kind of covers this information. And one thing though that I think I was in sort of partial error, I was talking about keto acids and then I was talking about ketone bodies as if they were kind of the same thing. And I was rereading the text and it said, be careful, keto acids and ketone bodies are not the same thing. So ketone bodies are what's produced when you have this excessive fat breakdown. And keto acids are kind of this intermediate molecule between amino acids and the cellular respiration intermediates. So not the same thing. And they're both called acids. These are also acidic, and we'll talk more about that today. But I just wanted to kind of share with you that, this is kind of what we've been talking about, is how our fuels are used to generate ATP. But one of the other things that I wanted to share with you is this concept of 2 different states that we have in our bodies that kind of determine what's happening with our fuels. And so these 2 states are the absorptive state and the post-absorptive state. And so this is showing you what's happening in the absorptive state. So the absorptive state is just after a meal. And so we're talking about probably the first couple of hours after a meal. And so what we've really talked about happening in that time frame is the fact that, we're getting glucose in from the digestive tract, and that glucose is being broken down into carbon dioxide and water and making ATP. But we also know that, we're bringing in amino acids as well, and then fats, triglycerides as well. And when you digest and absorb those, then those get used to make proteins. Extra glucose will get used to make a storage form of glucose called glycogen. And if you think of glucose as, we know glucose is a monomer. It's a single sort of ring-shaped structure. What you do to make glycogen is you bond those together in what's called the dehydration reaction, and you form these long branched chains of glucose, and that is glycogen. And this is done in mainly the liver and the skeletal muscle cells. For muscles. Okay. And then amino acids can be used for energy. That doesn't happen all that much, but the extra amino acids can also be stored as fats. So this is something to consider too. If you eat a lot of additional protein that your body cannot use to make muscle, then it will just basically get used to make fat. So you have to be a little bit careful about high protein diets that are also high calorie, because of the tendency for amino acids to be converted into these keto acids, these 2-carbon backbones that then can get made into fats. Okay, so when we think about what hormone is going to drive that absorptive state, what hormone is the hormone that gets produced when our blood glucose levels go up? Exactly. Yeah. So when our blood glucose levels go up, our pancreas detects that and produces insulin. So insulin is really the main driver of the absorptive state. And this picture kind of shows the locations where this stuff is happening in the absorptive state. So, you have your gastrointestinal tract, and your small intestine is the main place where absorption is happening. And you have glucose that's coming in from the meal that you ate. And it can be stored as glycogen in muscle. And it can also be stored as glycogen in the liver here. And then, of course, we can use it in the tissues, assuming that glucose or that insulin is present, right? Insulin has to be present in order for that glucose to get into your body cells. And then it can be used for cellular respiration. Also, of course, if extra glucose calories can get taken up by fat cells here in adipose tissue, made into fatty acids and glycerol, and thus made into fats. So, all of these fuel sources can be made into fat, which is that high calorie storage form of energy. Notice here too that, they're showing that fats get absorbed, and that not all fats just lead to fats, which is kind of what they seem to be kind of showing here. But as we said, some fats can be broken down into essentially, so that they can be used for making ATP directly. And then our amino acids, as we bring those in from the gastrointestinal tract, they get used to make proteins primarily. And the liver is a big producer of proteins, especially blood proteins. So I'm thinking like albumin and other like liver enzymes that get made. Those are being made with those amino acids that got brought in. And then in the skeletal muscle, what proteins are being made in the skeletal muscle? Yeah, actin and myosin. So you're going to have actin and myosin within the cells. And then, of course, these tendons are made out of collagen. Yeah, so that's definitely, something that has to be made using those amino acids, definitely. So the idea behind sort of the absorptive state is it's kind of a net anabolic state. You can rebuild any sort of muscle proteins that got broken down by doing strength training. This is one of the reasons that they say, to eat a meal as a recovery after a heavy exercise bout, because that's going to help you bring those tissues back and build them stronger. So it's something to realize about it. And so insulin then, if we look at kind of the flow chart that shows how insulin works, insulin responds, the insulin producing cells, these are called the beta cells of the pancreatic islets. These cells respond to the increased blood glucose and increased blood amino acids. So they act a little bit on the amino acids too. And so they actually help amino acids and glucose go into the tissue cells. And so how this is working is that you have the target cells have these insulin receptors on their surface. And so when when the insulin binds to the receptors, it causes these transporters, which we would call carrier proteins, to become active in the cell membrane. And so you can see here that those carrier proteins actually are helping glucose diffuse into the cells. So it's not an active transport carrier, it's a passive transport carrier. So thus we call that facilitated diffusion. The amino acids, on the other hand, are actively transported. So those are different carriers that are using ATP in order to move those across. And once you have the glucose in those cells, again, it can be used to make ATP, your energy, or you can make fats, or you can make the storage form of glycogen. And one thing I wanted to mention about this absorptive state is that your glycogen stores are actually quite finite. And what I mean by that is I actually read somewhere like how many grams of glycogen you can store, and it's like I want to say maybe 500 calories worth. So that would be like 120 grams. It's not a lot. The stores are so what we're telling you is that it's only going to get you I'm just going to guess here, around 500 calories with a capital C, or kcals. So what I'm telling you is that that's only going to last you a couple hours in your day. So you eat a meal like every 4 hours. By the end of that 4-hour time span, the glycogen that you had stored is going to start getting used up and might be gone after about 4 hours. And in that case, we've moved now into what we call the post-absorptive state. So let's talk about the post-absorptive state. So here we see this new term, post-absorptive state. And this would be about, let's say, 3 to 4 hours after a meal. And it also depends on your exercise level. So if you're exercising, heavily for 2 hours, you would be in the post-absorptive state. So it could be as short as a couple hours. It could be as short as an hour if you were exercising heavily. Because what happens is that in the post-absorptive state, the stored glycogen starts to run out. And that causes your blood glucose levels to fall. So in order to kind of prevent this from happening in a real precipitous way, like boom, all of a sudden you hit the brick wall, right? You have that stored glycogen, so you need to just release it. And so the post-absorptive state is actually controlled by the hormone that's kind of opposite to insulin, and that hormone is called glucagon. Glucagon also comes from the pancreas, and it tends to have this sort of catabolic thrust. So you're kind of breaking things down. So you're taking glycogen that you had stored, and you're breaking it down into its subunits, which are glucose molecules. And in the liver, the glucose molecules will be released into the blood. In the skeletal muscle cells, the glucose stays in the skeletal muscle cells to provide fuel for those skeletal muscle cells. Proteins start getting broken down into amino acids, but not a lot, because you're not going to use those amino acids for fuels for the most part. But triglycerides, which are your fats, are really definitely going to start getting broken down so that you can burn those fats as fuels. And so we see here that glucose from what they're calling glycogenolysis, which would be the lysis means splitting, and glycogen is that storage form of glucose. And then something called gluconeogenesis, the making of new glucose, which can happen from using your fatty acids, glycerol, or amino acids for that matter. So you can make new glucose, and you can also use some of those ketones and break that down in cellular respiration to make ATP to keep going. And this is kind of showing how the amino acids can be used to make glucose. So this is kind of showing that gluconeogenesis. Okay, so let's look at again where this is happening. So at our major organs that are kind of involved in this interconversion. So you can see again, the liver is a big deal here. The liver is able to take the stored glycogen and break it down into glucose, and then that goes out into the bloodstream. And what we're seeing different here in this picture from the last picture is that the brain right here is using that glucose to make ATP. And the reason that they're pointing this out is that the brain can only use glucose to generate energy. Other tissues can use the fatty acids and the glycerol to make the energy, but not the brain. So that's why in the post-absorptive state, you might start to feel like a brain fog, hangry, start not to be functioning quite as well, which is why I'm not a big fan of those ketogenic diets where you starve your body of carbohydrates, because glucose is your main body fuel, and your brain especially needs glucose in order to run. And so if you're starving your body of carbs, you're going to feel bad. And I don't know if any of you have tried that ketogenic diet. I mean, if you're eating mostly fats, it's true that you'll be breaking down those fats, and making ketone bodies out of them. But those are acidic too. And so those aren't going to make you feel good either. So it is a good weight loss mechanism, but it's not really sustainable in the long term. And it apparently feels pretty rotten. So this is also just showing here that the stored glycogen in the muscle can be broken down and used to create ATP. You could break down your protein in muscle, but again, you're going to conserve that. And then here in the post-absorptive state, you're definitely going to have lipolysis, and that will allow you to break down the fats into fatty acids and glycerol, and then the liver can take those and make new glucose out of it. It can be used, the fatty acids can be used using that beta oxidation to make more ATP using Krebs cycle and electron transport chain. So, basically helping to maintain that homeostasis, keeping the glucose levels up until you get to your next meal, which is why I always say, it's a good idea, to eat your 3 solids a day, especially breakfast, and especially before tests. Come in with a little extra glucose, have a Coke right before, just, make sure that your brain has enough glucose for it to function. Don't come in on an empty stomach. Probably not a good idea for test taking. And then this next slide just shows again how the glucagon works in the system, so that the lower plasma glucose levels stimulate these other cells within the pancreas called the alpha cells, and they produce glucagon, which is this protein hormone, and that triggers fat breakdown from the adipose tissue, and it triggers the glycogenolysis and the gluconeogenesis. So that helps hold your plasma glucose levels up and also helps you to use your fatty acids for fuel. And they call that glucose sparing. And that's in a negative feedback cycle so that the rise, if as your glucose levels come up, that cycle evens out. But hopefully at this time, you're going to be thinking, you're going to be hungry. You're going to also have a symptom of being hungry. And so you'll probably be thinking about getting your next meal on board.
Thanks for watching.